It's rads. We're going to try to make this a slideshow again and see if it actually works this time. Hoo-hoo, it did. All right. So we're talking about sustainability, urbanization, and kind of what comes along with that. And briefly, know that, and again, don't have to write all of these details, but know that generally we're seeing people move from more rural areas to more urban areas for lots of reasons. There's more jobs, there's more attractions, more entertainment, things like that. And urban areas tend to be a lot more densely populated, right? Think cities, that kind of stuff. For the record, we do consider suburban areas also lumped in with urban areas because a lot of the environmental impacts of them are kind of similar. The biggest difference is that a true urban area, though densely populated, actually minimizes the amount of driving people have to do and how much land person uses. If you look at like how much space a city person lives in, it's a lot less typically than somebody in the suburbs. Those are things that actually decrease the environmental impact of living in an actual urban area. Currently, though, we're seeing the highest growth in suburban regions. People get the benefits of living near urban centers without some of the costs or some of like the busyness and things like that. So we'll talk about kind of what that means. Sorry, I'm covering my face. It's covering over here. Just again, a little bit more about like what suburbs are. If you know this already, don't write it down. Okay. Wait, it's not going. There we go. I include this picture just because I think it's really interesting to see where our urban centers are and also to recognize that when we're talking about this, I mean, look at where we are. We're in what we call a megalopolis, which is like a series of cities that kind of all run together. And if you look pretty much from Boston to DC, we are in one big, massive megalopolis. And you can see how much of our space is occupied and is densely populated. I'm skipping that. Again, the other reason that I show this is just so you can kind of get the idea of some of these city sizes. And we're pretty familiar here with New York City, right, which we know is a massive city. And you can see the population. This is a little old, but it's similar still. We're almost double the population of the next city, which is LA. And again, LA is a huge city too. But when we're talking about scale, like New York is up there. You just for your own information. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what this means and what happens. So one of the first things with urbanization, obviously, is we're reducing the amount of vegetation. And we just talked about the benefits of forest and trees. So we know that if we're reducing that, we're going to have some issues. We also are taking a lot of the soil surfaces and we're replacing them with what we call impervious surfaces. So things that are not going to allow water to infiltrate into the ground. Things like concrete, asphalt, cement. And this image kind of over here shows you what happens with water in a typical system, right? So if we have natural ground cover, we definitely have evaporation, right? That's going to happen. We have a little bit of runoff, 10% or so, and then we get about 50% of that water being infiltrated into the soil. If you look on the other hand in a city where we have lots of impervious surfaces, we have a little bit less evaporation. We have a lot more runoff, and we only have 15% as opposed to 50% of our water being infiltrated into the soil. So it's a pretty big difference. This is going to prevent groundwater recharge. So overuse of groundwater we already see happening, and now it's recharged. That's not a great combination of things. And it's also going to increase runoff into bodies of water. And that runoff can contain a lot of pollutants, a lot of nutrients that can cause damage to the bodies of water that they're running into. Oh dear. The other thing, as we look at urbanization, is the carbon dioxide emissions. So when we're all of these things, right, and you don't have to know them all, but when we're making cement, the machinery that goes into building these things, the deforestation, landfills needed, all of those are going to contribute to carbon dioxide emissions, and we have more of those with more urbanization. Now, this is something I mentioned in class the other day too. Another side effect of those impervious surfaces is that we have what's called heat islands, right? Because a lot of those surfaces now are going to absorb that heat and they're going to hold it. So typically what we see in downtown areas are temperature degrees that sometimes can be up to almost 4 degrees Celsius different in a downtown area versus a rural area, strictly because of that albedo effect and some of that other stuff. So that's also going to impact how much people need to cool, like how much air conditioning we're using and things like that, which is going to also have environmental impacts. So just something to be aware of. Now, the other thing that we think about, and I mentioned this briefly, was with our water unit, but it's going to come up again. A lot of our cities are on the coast. Take a peek at any major city around the world, and they're often right by the coast. So when we have a situation where we're not having a lot of groundwater recharge and we're having a lot more runoff, right, we're going to end up with groundwater supplies that are diminishing. And if they're diminishing, we can end up with saltwater intrusion if it's near the coast. Once that happens, we've got saltwater in our groundwater. It's not usable for us anymore. And it kind of hard to get it back to normal without just like letting that well reset, which takes a long period of time. The other thing that we're seeing, we know that the sea levels are rising due to climate change. As the ocean warms, it expands, so it actually rises just from that. Plus, we have melting ice. That's going to also contribute to that sea level or saltwater intrusion happening sooner than we normally would see. We've already talked about this, so you can peruse that on your own. We know how that works. It's not all bad though, right? There's good stuff that happens. And I'm going to fly through this. I don't think you need to write a lot of these down, just be aware. But obviously in urbanization, it's more efficient. We use less gasoline. We use more, like our transportation costs, there's more mass transport, stuff like that is good. And it also fosters a lot of education. We've got universities and research centers. People come together for the greater good in a lot of those places. If we also kind of contain our land, right, to these dense urban centers, we leave more room for there to be green spaces and natural spaces and room for agriculture outside because we haven't let people kind of sprawl into that. Which brings me to this, my urban sprawl. So a lot of our population is moving out of dense urban centers into suburban areas, partly because it's cheaper, right? It's a lot cheaper to own property and to own more property in the suburbs. You get bigger houses, you get more land for the same price. Because cars are readily available and gas is, I'm going to say relatively cheap. We know it's not super cheap, but like relatively cheap. It's easy to get around so people can have the benefits of living kind of more of a suburban lifestyle, but still get into a city to, take in all the cultural stuff. The other thing is, as people leave, like it's a domino effect. Other people start to leave too. And the problem, this starts sort of a positive feedback loop where as people leave the cities, we see a decline in tax revenue. Here's your little image. When there's less tax, services get cut. When services get cut, people get not so happy. Businesses leave. When businesses leave, we get even less revenue. The neighborhoods start to decline because people are leaving to the suburbs. And then the more people leave, the less taxes we take in. And it's this vicious cycle. So a lot of times cities fall into kind of disrepair pretty quickly as people move out. And again, the businesses follow the people. So we end up with situations where there's a lot of blight, infrastructure that's run down, people not living there anymore, so it's not cared for. And then again, that nobody wants to live around that, so people move out even more. There's a lot of cities that are trying to combat blight. I know Detroit has done a lot because they fell into, as the car industry collapsed and I don't want to say collapsed, but took some hits. And as people started to leave, there was a lot of blight. And they started to reclaim some of those neighborhoods. And some of the stuff that we're going to start to look at around growth, like sustainable growth, is going to fall into those. Now, in terms of what causes sprawl, I sort of already went through this. So this is going to be really quickly. It's why people are leaving, right? It's easier to travel. We got a lot of highways, things like that. It's great. So I'm going to skip over here because I like the solution part better. So one of the big things that a lot of places have done is they've set what's called an urban growth boundary. So it's a zoning law. And we have zoning laws even here in town that say, okay, if you're in this area, this is the type of buildings that can exist. For example, in Southington, you can look up what your house is zoned as, depending on like what your zoning regulation is. That'll determine the size of the property and the size of the homes that are on those properties and how densely populated they are. So again, we can set rules about how much urban sprawl there is. And actually, Portland has been a really good city for this. They've got a really strong urban growth boundary. Like Portland proper is a big city. It's like a nice city and they do what they need to in there. But outside of it, it becomes pretty rural pretty quick. And there's not a whole lot of suburban sprawl as opposed to like a city like Chicago, or if you've ever been to Chicago, you know that you can go up to the top of the Sears Tower, I think that's what it's still called, and look out and like literally all you see is like suburban neighborhoods for as far as the eye can see. There's a lot of sprawl there. Now, the other thing we're trying to do is to make places more walkable and to have mixed land use. And you're going to notice this now that I'm telling you this everywhere. But if you look at a lot of the new growth, you have businesses on the bottom and you have condos on top or apartments on top. So you have people living above these like areas. And a lot of times down below, there's retail shops, there's restaurants, there's things like that. So the idea is like people can live and walk and get all the cultural things in kind of the same area that they need to, which is nice. We're going to talk a little bit more about smart growth in class. I don't want to really get into it too much now. We're going to design our own sustainable city around smart growth. But a lot of the principles, as you can kind of see behind me, again, are making places walkable or bikeable, making people be able to kind of be within their local environment and get what they need, but also then keep a lot of that area around open for walking trails and green spaces and farms and things like that. I'm going to do this part kind of quickly because I'm already coming up on 10 minutes and I try not to go over 10 minutes. We know that runoff is going to be a problem. I already talked about this, right? So again, we don't need to go through this again. But again, this part, sorry, you can kind of just get the idea of all of the different types of pollutants that can go in, right? And believe it or not, salt is a big one. Like, think about how salted our roads are right now. All that's running off into the storm drain, and that can hurt plants and insects quite a bit. We get a lot of sediment, which leads to turbidity, meaning like cloudiness in the water. That's going to impact the ability of sunlight to get down to the plants below, so that's not good for them. And then obviously we have fertilizer and pesticides, which have their own set of issues that go along with it. The other thing is a lot of oil and gas, like remnants of that, or even chemicals related to cars. Those will kill a lot of living things if they get into too high of concentrations. So let's talk solutions, because that's the better part, right? So one of the big solutions is permeable pavement. So it's pavement that's specifically allowed for stormwater to infiltrate and recharge. So it's like a little engineering feat, right? My gosh, my face is in the way everywhere. I'm so sorry, kids. There. So permeable pavers, like you see here, let stuff kind of go through. So you get the benefit of the pavers, but it's not like concrete where things can't get through, but you still get that paved surface. You're going to get decreased runoff, which means decreased pollutants, and your water is going to be cleaner. So yay. And it also decreases the likelihood of flooding. So a lot of times in cities, if there's a lot of rain, because it can't get infiltrated into the soil, we get flooding. So this will help mitigate that as well. It is more costly. I'm seriously still in the way. Whatever, it's fine. You can see around me. It's more costly than traditional pavers. So it's an initial cost up front, but the benefits and the cost of, like, we don't have to worry about remediation of it is helpful. Little interruption. All right. One of the other solutions is a rain garden. And I personally love this because I like plants. But they're gardens that are planted in urban areas, kind of around storm drains, that again decrease runoff. So it gives it kind of a place to go. Plus, it looks really pretty, right? Which is nice. Like, look how nice that looks. That's lovely. Decreases of flooding, all the same deal, right? But again, you're allowing for more infiltration. And not to mention, we talked about like the aesthetic appeal, like that's just nice. Also creates habitats for pollinators. So we can actually have little pollinator like jumping points, if you will, because it's also plants where storing carbon dioxide. So lots of good stuff. Public transit is obviously another option. If we have more cars on the road, we're going to have more pollutants on the streets. So if we can get there to be less cars, we're going to have less pollutants. The other thing, if there's less cars, we need less lanes. We need less places for them to be. That means more green space, right? Which is benefit. And we obviously know that there's a lot less carbon dioxide emissions if we get people using mass transit. So multi-benefit there, right? Gosh, I'm sorry, this is long. All right, the other one is building up, not out, right? If we build vertically up, we have, again, less space where we have to have impervious surfaces. So we're going to decrease runoff. So that's a helpful thing. And if we build up and we have green rooftops on green rooftops on the tops of the buildings, that's going to even further decrease runoff because it's catching more rain and it's letting it go somewhere. And again, it looks pretty. Like, let's let things look pretty, right? We're also sequestering carbon dioxide. It's all the benefits of having those green spaces as well. So yay. Okay. Here's your FRQ. We made it. This one's thinking a little bit about an investigation. So I really want you to think about how you would design this, really focusing on those independent and dependent variables and how you'd make that work. Thanks for hanging in. Sorry, that was a little bit long. We'll see you next time.